Hey, welcome back. I'm Carissa, and if you're new here, I have started a new series to sort of document my Master Gardener training. If you're interested in the previous videos or the introduction, which explains sort of what we're going to be going through with this series, I will link the playlist in the description below. So today's topic is composting. What is composting? Why do us gardeners need to know about it or even practice it? So composting is the natural process of decaying materials for use as a fertilizer to improve soil health and plant health. You are recycling organic matters such as leaves, food waste, grass clippings, that type of thing, recycling those items to create an organic matter to be used as a fertilizer in your garden. So some of the reasons why we want to be composting, as I previously mentioned, fertilizer. This will improve your soil health and your plant health. Another reason would be to minimize waste. So instead of sending our potential fertilizer to the dump, we are using those materials to create something that we need and will really benefit from. Another thing is control. So when you're buying a fertilizer from the store, it's not often that you can really understand where all those materials or ingredients came from. So when you're creating your own rich compost and fertilizer at home, you have control over what goes into it, what doesn't go into it, and that type of thing. Another benefit would be to conserve water. It has been shown that using compost in your garden will help maintain your water level, hold in moisture, and actually facilitate improper drainage as well. So it's almost a no-brainer why we would want to use compost in our own yards. A question to ask yourself if you're interested in composting is how. There are many different methods, a lot of good advantages to each different method, but it's important to choose the method that suits yourself. If you live in an apartment or a small space, there is a composting method for you. Vermicomposting would be a perfect solution for someone in a small space. Worms can be homed in an area about 1.5 to 2 feet squared. They take little maintenance and provide a very, very rich compost. Vermicomposting would be your first idea if you are limited in space. A few other methods would be the bokashi method. This is starting with an inoculated substance and fermenting it. It's also a method that you can use in a smaller space if you're limited. When you're deciding which method to use for your own situation, it's important to think of a few different questions. So where do you live? What is your available space? How much organic waste do you produce? What kind of organic waste do you produce? What is the amount of time that you want to spend with your composting? So all of these questions will determine which type of method that you can use in your situation. If you're limited in space, vermicomposting, the use of worms, is a great idea if you're limited on space. The bokashi method would be using a fermented sort of mixture. And it's also a great method if you're limited on space. The bokashi method also is great because you can use meat and dairy products, which is not ideal for a typical compost situation. Another thing to think about. And if you're thinking about the amount of time you have to devote to this composting, some things to think about are if you want to do the hot or cold, slow or fast composting. So hot is a little bit more hands-on method, a little bit more time required, but it produces a compost quicker because of the hot temperature. Slow or cold composting is exactly what it sounds like. You are just leaving it, letting the process happen naturally, and after about a year you will be getting your rich compost. So those are all things to think about. Really encouraged because it seems like anybody can compost. It just is a matter of which method you choose to use. Okay, how to get started. So the first thing to think about is your site assessment. What sort of situation do you have? Like I said, if you're in an apartment, composting with worms is probably ideal for you, or the bokashi method. And if you have a normal sized sort of city lot, you might want to utilize the hot or fast composting method, just so that you can sort of get it going faster and use your space a little bit more wisely. I use the slow or passive or cold method of composting, mostly because I'm lazy. I haven't really been motivated to start a hot compost, but after I listened to this presentation, I'm definitely interested in starting a hot compost. The benefit is within 8 to 12 weeks, you can have a rich fertilizer for your soil that is ready for your garden. So I think I'm going to be trying hot composting in this spring. Okay, so when you are choosing an area in your yard to place your compost, you can be thinking about a level area. It doesn't need to be sunny or shady, both will work. Easy access to your house, convenience, so that if you are doing the hot method and you're going to be turning it frequently, which we will get into soon, you want to have it nearby, right? The more convenient the location is, the more likely it is that you're going to get out there and sort of turn your compost more often. So keep those things in mind when you're choosing your area. And your structure can be as simple as a pile or as complicated as a 3-bay system, which allows you to sort of have you have your brand new pile, the most fresh, you have your partially decomposed, and then your fully ready to go fertilizer in your 3rd bay. So like I said, it can be as simple as a pile. You can purchase a pre-made bin. Plastic bins are available in most, I would say, big box stores or online. You can create a wood structure. There are lots of different ways you can go about it. Just choose one that suits your lifestyle and your yard. For size, it is a good idea to start with at least 3 by 3, so 3 feet by 3 feet squared, and then building in height. So 3 foot by 3 foot allows you to have an area large enough for it to get hot enough if you want to be doing the hot composting. But it's also a great size for a beginner. Okay, a few other things to think about when you are doing your compost. So composting is just mimicking the natural process of decaying materials, right? If you look into a forest, the needles are dropping, the leaves are dropping, and it's naturally creating that top rich layer that is found on the forest floor. So we as gardeners in the composting method are just mimicking that natural decaying process. All right, a simple ratio to build your composting pile is to keep the ratio 2 to 1 in mind. So 2 being your carbon, your brown materials. These are your leaves, your small bits of wood, cardboard, even paper. So that's your carbon. So you want 2 parts of carbon for every 1 part of nitrogen. Nitrogen would be anything green, if you can think of it like that, or freshly dead. Green or freshly dead would be a good way to describe the nitrogen layer that you're adding. So this is grass clippings, these are leaves, this is all of your food waste, your kitchen scraps, and that is your nitrogen. So 2 parts of the brown and 1 part of the green, and that will create a great ratio for those microorganisms and really help facilitate the breaking down process. And some things to think about are air. So when we're adding our different materials, there are some that will actually help facilitate the aeration of our piles. So air is a major consideration in your composting. Another one would be moisture. A dry pile will not decay and decompose as the same as a wet pile would. So moisture is definitely a good consideration. The idea is to think of a wrung out sponge, and that is the sort of moisture level that you are looking for your pile. So I live in a dry climate. I'm going to be watering my pile in order to facilitate that decaying process. For the microorganisms that are living in your pile, they are doing all the work actually. They are the ones feeding on all of this organic material and breaking it down, using all the benefits of their life cycle to break down our pile. Air is important for them and moisture is important for them as well. They need water for their bodies and for the materials they are consuming in order to facilitate that process. And another thing to consider is particle size. So if you are doing a passive sort of hands-off method, you can throw anything in your pile. It's just a matter of time, right? If you're throwing in large pieces of wood, it might take years for that piece of wood to break down. So the smaller the size that you're dealing with and putting into your pile, the faster it's going to break down. So I would say 1/2 inch is probably a good size for any wood materials. I've heard of people blending up their food waste and putting it into their compost pile just to speed up the process. So just keep that in mind. Particle size is definitely something to think about for the speed of which these materials can break down. Okay, so you are ready to use your compost. Whether you did the fast hot method and it took you 8 to 12 weeks to get this material ready, or maybe you took the slower method and it took you up to 12 months. But you are ready to add this rich, nutrient-dense material to your garden. So how do we go about this? Spreading 1 inch or 2 to your garden beds in the fall is a great idea. If it's partially decomposed, then you're not going to be hurting any of your plants. So putting a 1 to 2 inch layer just around your perennial beds, your garden beds, into your vegetable garden, it'll really benefit your plants and your soil health. Another idea is mulching. Using compost to mulch early summer after your soil has warmed up. If you do it too early, it could actually slow down your soil temperature. So early summer, spreading a thin layer of compost will definitely help your garden and deter weeds as well. Okay, what not to put in your compost? Some of these are very, very obvious, but I will just go through the list. So plants or grasses that have been exposed to herbicides. Like I said at the beginning, you have control over what is going in your compost. We do not want herbicides in our gardens for numerous reasons. So making sure that none of the plants that you have used herbicides on, or maybe you are getting materials from your neighbors, ask them if they've used herbicides in the past. Just be aware of what is going into your compost in that way. Meat and dairy. So if you want to use meat and dairy in your composting, the bokashi method is probably a fit for you. But if you are using an outdoor compost, you are going to attract pests and rodents and probably bears if you are using meat and dairy in your compost. So that's something to stay away from. Another thing is pathogens, right? You might create a very hazardous pile by using those things. So it's best for the normal home gardener to stay away from using meat and dairy in their composts. Pet waste. That has no place in composting for the obvious reasons. Do not put your pet waste into your compost. So do not put diseased plants in your compost either. If you are using the hot composting method, there are studies shown the hot method potentially could get rid of these diseases, but to be safe, if you're not constantly regulating the temperature or observing what temperature your pile is, it's best to not put diseased plants into your compost just to sort of control the spread of some of those diseases. Again, weed seeds. If you are using the hot method, you might get rid of the viability of weed seeds, but just to be safe, I would not put weed seeds into my compost. It just controls the further spread of some of these noxious weeds. Old home canning. So this is not a place to put your old home canning. If it has gone bad and it is spoiled, it's probably not wise to put it into your compost. And an obvious one is plastic. Plastic does not break down. It will always be in your garden. It's not a good idea to put into your compost. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to go over was troubleshooting. So say you have smell, pests, or different issues with your compost. Let's go through some solutions for those. Okay, so if your compost is smelling, maybe your neighbor's complaining, maybe your family's complaining, here are some ideas to remedy that smell. The first thing would be to put your fresh material in, dig a hole in your compost about a foot deep, maybe even deeper if you can, and bury your fresh materials in the ground. That will help with fruit flies, that will help with pests, and that will help with smell. It's a great idea. And then similarly with pests, you can be doing the digging with the fresh material. Another idea is to put a hardware cloth surrounding your compost to make sure that those critters can't get in. In an extreme situation, you can even build a pest-proof composting structure. And that's quite a commitment, so it depends on your pest pressure and what extreme you need to go to get those critters out of your garden. And the last potential problem would be a fire. A hot compost does get quite hot with its temperature, but if you are maintaining the moisture level in your pile, a fire is not a concern at all. So a dry pile could potentially cause a fire because of the heat that is produced in the composting process. But if you are maintaining that moisture level, a fire is not a concern for you. Well, those are the basics of composting. I hope that was informative for you. I hope it made you start thinking about composting if you're not actually practicing this yet. I really enjoyed this presentation and I'm looking forward to sort of fine-tuning my composting method in the future. So anyway, thank you for watching. Our next video for this series will be on herbaceous plants. Have a great day and thanks for joining me. Bye.